This week, Channel 3 is taking a stand. We are united against domestic violence and committing to making a difference. Channel 3's Monica Robbins explains.
Each day in the United States, 3 women are killed in domestic violence disputes. Their stories make headlines and bring calls for help. In the shadows are the living victims, whose days and nights are consumed with fear that they'll be next.
He broke into the home 3 times, and detectives wouldn't do anything.
And he shot me 3 times.
Too many victims of domestic violence say the system put in place to help failed them time and time again. So what is working? Several months ago, Channel 3 set out to find the people who are taking bold risks and unconventional paths to make a difference. We're going to take you inside a courtroom unlike any other in Ohio in how it handles victims and abusers.
The offender is accountable every single week to all of us.
To a new victim shelter still under construction that will provide services, comforts, and protection rarely seen before.
The one definite security feature that the building will have is that everything is located here.
With the help of Kent State University journalism students, we dug into domestic violence arrests and convictions to see who is committing these crimes and how often it's happening. This week, it's not about telling you there's a problem. Together, we're doing something about it. Join us all this week on Channel 3 News as we stand united against domestic violence.
We are kicking off a special series in hopes of uniting us all in the effort to end domestic violence.
This evening, our senior health correspondent Monica Robbins brings us the story of one woman's tragic experience with domestic violence and how a new program may help prevent future cases like hers. Monica, good evening.
Good evening, Russ and Chris. Sonia Garth never intended for she and her daughter to become the faces of domestic violence, but their story is one of hundreds that tragically explain why the system needs to change to save lives. Sonia Garth once loved Rufus Gray, even after the abuse began a year into their relationship. Her daughter Davia loved Rufus too. She called him Daddy.
I didn't see it to the end. Everybody else seen it around me.
After 7 years of threats and physical violence, Sonia had enough. She kicked Rufus out, changed the locks, her cell phone number, blocked his calls, and bolted the windows. Rufus, however, found a place to stay, just 4 houses away. Sonia says she called the police more than 200 times during their marriage, but never believed a protection order would help her.
If I didn't do the restraining order or put order of protection, they wasn't going to help me. I remember the ones telling me this specifically because I'm the girl to cry wolf too much.
On October 30th, Sonia, Davia, and her older son Philip settled in to watch LeBron's return to the Cavaliers. She looked away from the TV to see Rufus standing in the doorway with a gun.
And he shot me. Shot me 3 times. My daughter jumped up, "Mommy." He missed her head, and he shot her in her torso.
She keeps the hole from the bullet that missed Davia's head covered with a cross and hides it with blinds. In the opposite corner is a shrine to the daughter she lost.
I allowed myself to put up with that just to be loved by somebody. And it wasn't worth it, and in the end, I paid for it dearly.
So where does a victim turn? Tim Bainline has 22 years in the field of domestic violence. He says between 15 and 30 people are killed in Cuyahoga County each year. Bainline sees promise in a program that will identify victims at high risk of homicide, like Sonia. Identifying abusers most likely to kill is now priority number 1.
There's a number of factors that the research has shown that these people are more likely to commit a domestic violence homicide.
In addition to looking into an abuser's characteristics like jealousy, manipulation, and hostility, police at the scene will now ask the victim specific questions about the abuser, such as, do they have access to weapons? Have they ever used a weapon against you? Have they ever tried to choke or strangle you? Do they abuse drugs or alcohol?
And if we can catch them early enough, we can set a higher bail, increase jail time, provide arguments for that kind of stuff in the court to make sure that this person is contained more effectively than a non-high-risk domestic violence offender.
But the program will only work if there's collaboration and coordination across every member of the team, including police, social services, prosecutors, jails, and probation officers.
This high-risk team has the potential to cut across all of those bridges and to make the connections so that we're all playing on the same team, so that these victims don't fall through the cracks.
This week, we've been shining a light on programs that are making a difference in stopping domestic violence and helping victims.
And tonight, senior health correspondent Monica Robbins takes us inside a new state-of-the-art shelter that has the ability to not only save, but change lives. Monica?
That's true, Chris. 1 out of 3 women will experience some form of domestic violence by an intimate partner in her lifetime. When the situation becomes dangerous, a shelter is often the safest place to go. But after 40-some years, it's time shelters evolve with the times. Michelle Hart and Tess, who asked us not to show her face, are among hundreds of women who've sought safe haven at Summit and Medina County Battered Women's Shelter. Both women escaped abusive situations.
It gave me time to breathe and say, okay, what just happened?
It was actually the best thing that I ever did. I was terrified. I was more horrified than anything because you think you're going to be stuck with a bunch of people you don't know.
While the current shelter offers protection, the home is old and space is cramped.
You could be sleeping next to 2, 3, 4 people that you don't know. And maybe you can do that for 1 or 2 nights, especially if your life was in danger.
Just to give you an idea of the close quarters, in the current shelter, 7 women would share this space. In the new shelter, each would have their own room. Welcome to the New Hope and Healing Center. It's an old nursing home being converted into a state-of-the-art shelter, not just for women in crisis.
Lots of collaboratives happening in elder abuse, in trafficking, in domestic violence, in men who are victims of domestic violence. We're getting a man about every 3 to 4 months right now, and we have to put him in a hotel. The new shelter will take men.
41 rooms can house 160 people because many victims bring their children. More importantly, each room is private, giving the victim and her family space to heal.
And when you start to feel better about yourself, you'll start looking at the future instead of the past.
But that's not all it offers. The Rape Crisis Center is housed here, and every resource women in domestic violence crisis situations need will be within these walls.
They can now have on-site services without leaving the building.
The time when a victim leaves a violent relationship is the period she's in most danger.
Riding the bus, out in their car, in the same neighborhoods, they are more visible and more at risk.
The center will house a beauty shop to help improve self-esteem, a clothing bank for basic needs and career wear, a computer lab, educational classes, and they and their children will have access to counseling services. As long as they're working on a plan, they can stay as long as they need. Average time is 50 days. So how big is the need for this?
As long as those beds are filled, the problem's big.
So once this opens, they expect it to be filled.
When felony domestic violence cases go to court in Summit County, they're handled a little differently. Senior health correspondent Monica Robbins takes us inside the state's first and only felony domestic violence court.
Domestic violence prosecution is the most difficult because you're dealing with a victim on every single case.
Angela Alexander should know. She's been prosecuting domestic violence cases in Summit County for more than a decade. Early on, she noticed that no matter how much time a defendant received, he'd eventually end up back in court. So 4 years ago, they made a dramatic change in how DV cases are handled.
We take high-risk defendants who would have went to prison, but who have accepted that they are a batterer.
Admitting that they're a batterer is just one of the criteria Judge Paul Gallagher demands in order for these repeat offenders to make it through the innovative 52-week program.
It's the most intense program that Summit County offers.
For consistency, he oversees every domestic violence case that comes through here. To get in and avoid prison, offenders must also convince the judge they truly want help and have positive social connections to keep them on track. Once in, they must pass numerous drug and alcohol screenings. They also get employment assistance, and they're monitored by the victim, her advocate, judge, prosecutor, and probation officer.
The offender is accountable every single week to all of us.
And that's not all. Weekly group counseling sessions with other offenders are mandatory. When one completes his goals, the accomplishment is recognized by others. For those who make it through, the stats are encouraging. 3 out of 4 don't reoffend. It's a small victory that cannot change the past or undo the hurt, but it can stop the cycle of domestic violence from continuing.
And just as importantly, this program focuses on the victim as well. While the offender is getting treatment, the victim is learning from the battered women's shelter how to make a safety plan and how to recognize and deal with the cycle of violence before it begins, Chris.
All right, thank you, Monica. And this is such an important issue that we have partnered with the Battered Women's Shelter of Summit and Medina counties to help them get their new shelter open. If you want to donate, go to WKYC.com and click on How to Help a Local Battered Women's Shelter link. Then click on the GoFundMe link, and you can make your contribution, and it is very appreciated.
In the fall of last year, WKYC and Kent State University's journalism program began collecting public records of domestic violence from the Summit County Clerk of Courts.
And over the next several months, they broke down that data to look at the problem in just one county. Senior health correspondent Monica Robbins shows us what they found.
It took Kent State journalism students weeks to collect and break down criminal records that included indictments and convictions for domestic violence in Summit County for 2013 and 14. We found an alarming trend of repeat offenders. 46% of those convicted of domestic violence had more than one offense. Summit County judges handed down 297 sentences to date for those who were convicted in those years. 175 offenders were sentenced to community control after their conviction. 108 were sentenced to prison. The oldest person convicted for domestic violence was 73, the youngest 20, the average age 36. It's a crime that happens in affluent communities and urban centers alike. After researching those convicted, we found 68% were African American, 38% white. 1% Asian, another 1% Hispanic. Women most frequently the victim. 92% of those convicted were male compared to 8% female. Despite all of this data, the experts we talked to told us these numbers did not represent the scope of the problem at all.
I think we've served, between all our programs, about 7,000 individuals or families, and then you say that there were 500 convictions, and that I wasn't good at math, but that doesn't make sense to me.